Lesson 2.4, Glucose Homeostasis in the Blood, Part 2. The goals of this lesson are to show how the liver, muscles, and fat work together to maintain energy homeostasis, and to use real-life examples of diet and physical activity when discussing energy homeostasis. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain where energy is stored after a meal, explain how energy comes out of storage during exercise or in times of fasting, and be able to apply energy metabolism to real-life scenarios. We'll achieve these goals through a Socratic discussion with the students about metabolism and an activity where students label a worksheet with what metabolic processes are activated in different scenarios. To prepare for this lesson, you will need to review the key scientific concepts that will be presented throughout the lesson. They include the names, input, and output of the metabolic processes, storage of extradietary glucose, amino acids, and fat, role of the small intestine, liver, pancreas, fat, muscle, kidney, and brain in maintaining blood glucose homeostasis, and which metabolic processes are turned on and off during fasting, feasting, and exercise. You can review the scientific content in the background reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, including instructions on how to manage this discussion and activity. The student workbook provides additional explanations for the students. You will need to print out one activity worksheet per student. The second page of this worksheet includes homework questions. The key points of this lesson's do now are that when there is too much glucose in the blood, the liver converts that glucose to glycogen and fatty acids to be stored, and amino acids can be used to create new proteins. When there is too little glucose in the blood, the liver exports glucose into the blood, protein in the muscles may be broken down to amino acids, and fatty acids are released from the fat tissue. We'll get there by engaging students in a discussion about glucose homeostasis and by reviewing the homework from Lesson 2.3. Ask students to tell you which metabolic pathways on Slide 2 are on when blood glucose is low versus when blood glucose is high. Students should have seen this content in Lesson 2.3 and in the Lesson 2.3 homework. You can review these concepts using the teacher primer and the teacher manual. The key points of this lesson's discussion are that acetyl-CoA is an important intermediary molecule that connects glucose and fatty acid metabolism. After a meal, the 3 macronutrients are packaged into different storage forms and stored in the liver or adipose. Glucose is converted to glycogen, which is stored in the liver and muscles. Amino acids can be converted to glucose or fatty acids and stored in the liver and muscles or adipose. Note that amino acids from the diet can be used to make proteins like those found in muscles, but you won't store amino acids as proteins. Extra amino acids are converted to glucose or fatty acids and stored appropriately. Fat is converted to triglycerides and stored in adipose. Extra fatty acids are packaged into triglycerides and sent to be stored in the adipose tissue. They travel in the blood in the adipose to the adipose in LDL and back from the tissues to the liver in HDL. Only the liver can create new glucose, which it does from amino acids, and the energy stores you use depends on the stage of fasting you are in. We'll get there by walking students through a Socratic discussion and a lecture. The overall focus of this discussion are the processes that are activated during times of feasting and fasting. Because there is a lot of content covered in this lesson, some teachers have split the lesson into 2 days, discussing what happens after eating when there's too much glucose on one day, and then what happens in times of fasting when there is too little glucose on the next day. We start the discussion about what is happening when extra glucose is in the blood, which occurs after eating, before showing what happens when you are fasting or between meals. To make this lesson more of a discussion and less of a lecture, you should prompt your students to predict which metabolic processes are turned on before giving them the answer. There are question prompts that you may find useful in the teacher manual. Caution: you will note that the images in the slide deck show the citric acid cycle occurring in the liver. This is for simplicity of the image and doesn't mean that the citric acid cycle only occurs in the liver. In fact, it is occurring in all cells except red blood cells. This may be the student's first time that they have seen acetyl-CoA. This is a molecule made up of 2 carbons, the acetyl part, and a coenzyme A, which is synthesized from vitamin B5. Acetyl-CoA is the end product of glycolysis as well as lipolysis. So when either glucose or fatty acids are being used for energy, the result is acetyl-CoA, which will then be shuttled into the citric acid cycle. For a more in-depth review of the concepts presented here, you can review the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The key points of this lesson's activity are that both the fat and carbohydrates are stored as fat after eating a high-fat, high-sugar foods. This is because glycogen stores fill up. Exercise is similar to fasting because you will use up your glucose stores first and then rely on fatty acids and amino acids for energy. We'll get there by having students complete a worksheet in groups. On a worksheet, small groups of students will draw arrows and figures showing what processes are turned on and off after a meal and during exercise. They should also describe what is happening in each of these instances. The key points of this lesson's wrap-up are that both the fat and carbohydrates are stored as fat after eating a high-fat, high-sugar food. This is because glycogen stores fill up. Exercise is similar to fasting because you will use up the glucose stores first and then rely on fatty acids and amino acids for energy. We'll get here by reviewing the answers from the activity together. After students complete the worksheet, you should review the content together as a class. The key points of this lesson's homework are that insulin is a hormone that tells the liver, muscles, and adipose to start storing energy for later. In diabetic patients, the normal insulin messages don't get interpreted, so these patients don't store energy as well. We'll get there by asking students to complete the second half of the activity worksheet. In the worksheet, students will be asked to label an image with the metabolic processes that are turned on when a diabetic person has just eaten a meal. We will review these answers to the homework as the Do Now in Lesson 2.5. There are a lot of concepts and terminology presented in this lesson, so be prepared to spend some extra time on the lesson. This lesson addresses the misconception that if you eat a low-fat diet, you won't be storing any more fat in your body. After this lesson, students should see that even if you don't consume any fat in your diet, you will still make fatty acids from extra carbohydrates or amino acids. Another misconception presented in this lesson is that low-carb, high-protein diets will cause you to lose weight and gain muscle. Actually, scientific studies have shown that weight loss due to a low-carb diet may actually be from a reduction in total calories, because protein and fats keep you fuller longer. If you were to cut out all carbohydrates from your diet but ate more protein in their place, your liver will simply convert the amino acids to glucose, and you will store the glucose as glycogen, just as you would if you had eaten the carbohydrates in the first place. Students sometimes ask about when to eat protein if they want to build muscles. New muscle fibers will be built when there is damage to the existing ones from exercise, and free amino acids are readily available. Because of this, it is best to eat protein right before or immediately following exercise. Some studies have shown that eating protein right before a workout is better because amino acids reach the muscles when you are actively using them, but this is often not recommended due to the discomfort that may occur from exercising on a full stomach. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain where energy is stored after a meal, explain how energy comes out of storage during exercise or times of fasting, and apply metabolism to real-life scenarios. Students will use the concepts of metabolism presented here throughout the remaining lessons in Unit 2, and when we learn about diabetes again in Lesson 3.6. You may want to remind students that the 3 macronutrients are used for energy in cells via the TCA cycle and the electron transport chain that we learned about in Lesson 2.2. Remember, all cells, except for red blood cells which don't have mitochondria, make most of their ATP via the TCA cycle and the electron transport chain. Don't forget that if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members and we will be happy to help.